issues with this, and I will take you through all of them one by one. Now, assessment of endometrium, of course, is an essential component when we are managing patients having any kind of infertility, more so when we are carrying out any ART procedure. And when the endometrium is assessed as thin, physicians and patients then have to face a decision whether to proceed or not to proceed with treatment in that particular cycle. In spite of this huge dilemma, the biggest challenge today that we have is what is the evidence of the effect of endometrial thickness on outcome? Or is there a uniform definition of a thin endometrium? What are the variations in endometrial thickness? And lastly, how do we treat this perplexing condition? I will only quote two studies, but there are plenty of such studies in the literature. First, mentioning that a thickness of 9 to 14 millimeters, measured on the day of progesterone supplementation, has a higher implantation and pregnancy rate compared to a thickness of 7 to 8 millimeters. So, this study telling that a higher endometrium gives a better pregnancy rate. We then have studies to the contrary that the average endometrial thickness in pregnant and non-pregnant group, both the groups was the same and it was not significant. So the thickness in the pregnant group and the non-pregnant group was the same. So some studies have found that a thin endometrial thickness negatively affects pregnancy, while other studies do not confirm this. This lack of consensus can possibly explain by the fact that we do not have a definition of a thin endometrium. Despite this, as I mentioned, this becomes an essential part of all standard fertility treatment monitoring. Let us first briefly talk about how do we measure the endometrial thickness. First, it should always be measured in the sagittal plane or the long axis. The measurement is of the thickest echogenic area from one stratum basalis to the other endometrial, the stratum basalis. It is usually thickest at about 1 centimeter from the fundus. But presence of a pathology, acute anteversion, intraversion, and sometimes even inter and intra observers variations leads to problems. In spite of all this, most studies use a definition of thin endometrium at either less than 7 millimeters or less than 8 millimeters on the day of HCG administration or starting of progesterone. However, there have been documented pregnancies even at endometrial thickness is as low as 3.8 millimeters. The other challenge is what is the incidence of thin endometrium? And let us look at this very large data from the Canadian ART database. 21,900 fresh embryo transfers spread over 3 years. The incidence was 12.3% if we put the cutoff at 8 millimeters, and it was 4% if we put it at 7 millimeters. In around 19,000 frozen thawed embryo transfers, same around 14% if it is less than 8 and 3% when it is less than 7. So depending on what cutoff you put, 7 or 8, there could be a 10% difference in the incidence. However, this is still likely to be an underestimate of the two incidents because this only presents cycles in which an embryo transfer was done. We do not know how many percentage of cycles are cancelled because of a thin endometrium. If we add that, the incidence could be significantly higher. So in IVF, if you look at all publications and you put a cutoff at less than 7, the incidence varies somewhere under 3%. But what about thin endometrium in ovarian induction cycles? Whether you do it with oral agents or with gonadotrophins, here there is a bigger variation from 6% to 38%. Second, it is important that all of these studies describe the incidence of thin endometrium in that particular ART treatment cycle. For us, the bigger challenge is what is persistently thin endometrium, and on that there is no evidence today as to what is the incidence of a persistent thin endometrium in ART and still more in ovulation induction. However, a large study, 3,000 patients, in only 0.3% the endometrium was less than 7, and even at a 6 millimeter, they still gave around a 20% pregnancy rate. This is one of the largest studies coming out of China, nearly 11,000 IVF cycles. They divided patients into four groups: less than 8, 8 to 11, 11 to 15, and more than 15. And what it found that with each increase in thickness of the endometrium, there was an improvement in clinical pregnancy rate. With increase in endometrial thickness, there is improvement in live birth rate. With increase in endometrial thickness, there is a fall in abortion rate. And with increase in endometrial thickness, there is a fall in ectopic pregnancy rate. So large studies suggesting that better the endometrium, better are the reproductive outcomes. This is data from our own study. This particular article is under review for publication. What we have taken is comparing endometrium from 6 millimeters to more than 14 millimeters. We have only taken ovum donation cycles so that the impact of ovarian stimulation goes away, all stimulated only by HRT standard protocol. And what we have found is that there is an increase in pregnancy rate, clinical pregnancy rate, implantation rate, and live birth rate with each millimeter increase in thickness above 6 millimeters. We have also found that there is a cutoff of 10 days of estrogen priming. And if we compare the live birth rate with less than 10 days of estrogen and more days of 10 days of estrogen, there is a significant difference in the outcomes. So to conclude on the definition and incidence, depending on whether you put it at less than 7 or less than 8, there is a huge variation in the incidence from as high as 38%, but in IVF at somewhere around under 3%. But as I mentioned earlier, this does not include a large chunk of cancelled cycles where the endometrium was less than 7 millimeters. Now, why could the endometrium be thin? There are multiple possible reasons behind this. One, it could be because of any type of inflammation. In India, genital tuberculosis possibly being the commonest. Or it could be iatrogenic because of repeated vigorous curetages, sometimes following hysteroscopic surgeries, or even laparoscopic surgeries where the cavity has been opened up. Or it could be medical. Large variety is idiopathic, or it could be because of poor vascularity or low estrogen receptors, could be because of postpartum endometritis, septic abortions, or some patients, the endometrium is simply inherently thin without any possible reason. So then the question is, what do we do in such patients? What investigation do we offer? And hysteroscopy is probably the most commonly used investigation. But let us see what is the evidence for routine hysteroscopy. And this is, I'm talking about doing a hysteroscopy before an IVF in the absence of any problem. And this INSIGHT trial, which proves that a routine hysteroscopy does not improve live birth rates in women who have a normal transvaginal ultrasound. So we are not talking about patients with a problem. This is in as a routine pre-op procedure. Same thing in patients who had recurrent IVF failures, women below the age of 38, normal ultrasound, and between 2 to 4 IVF failed cycles. Again, this does not improve the live birth rate. So a routine hysteroscopy pre-IVF possibly does not help. There is also some evidence that we should also look at endometrial pattern and not only the thickness, because the pattern is also equally important. And what these studies show that clinical pregnancy rates following transfer of euploid embryos after PGTA was not different when the endometrium was 7 or less or more than 8, but possibly it was the endometrial pattern that one should be looking at. Large systematic study and meta-analysis, 1170 studies included, very large. No difference in live birth rate for endometrium of less than 7 millimeter. So what this large meta-analysis concluded was that the use of endometrial thickness as a tool to decide on cycle cancellation, freezing of all embryos, and refraining from further IVF treatment seems not to be justified based on the currently available meta analysis. So, this is only the beginning of the confusion. We don't know what is a thin endometrium, we don't know how frequently it happens, and we still really don't know how significant an impact it has on outcomes. So then we now have a bigger challenge as to how do we improve the endometrial thickness in particular or endometrial receptivity in general. The first thing that we need to look at is develop an ovarian stimulation protocol that will have a minimal effect on this. And here the simplest is if you are on a clomiphene stimulation, change the stimulation, stop the clomiphene. Second is to move to segmentation and avoid the endometrium in a stimulated cycle and transfer the embryos in a subsequent, either a natural cycle, modified natural, or a HRT cycle. Third, and the most obvious, is to correct any pathology. And as my predecessor, Dr. Sanjiva mentioned, fibroids, polyps, septums, adhesions, any intrauterine pathology that we see should be and has to be corrected because we know that apart from its anatomical interference, polyps, adenomyomas, and leiomyoma also alter the endometrial molecular expressions. So, apart from its physical effect, it also impacts negatively at a molecular level. So, any type of pathology which is impinging on the cavity needs to be removed. Then we have a host of patients in whom the condition is idiopathic. And this is where we have numerous agents in the form of drugs, aspirin, sildenafil, nitroglycerin, arginine, vitamin E, and pentoxifylline. Or we have alternative modalities like GCSF, endometrial stretching, and PRP. And let us see what is the evidence covering all these various adjuvants for preparing or improving a thin endometrium. Now, when we come to aspirin, probably the most commonly used adjuvant in assisted reproduction, more so for a thin endometrium, there is only one small non blinded RCT. And this is the RCT, low dose aspirin prospective randomized study. Look at the number of patients, 6 and 12, very small number of patients. And this study concluded again that there was no demonstrable increase in endometrial thickness. However, there was a statistically significant improvement in the implantation way. So, a very small study, 18 patients, telling that this could be of benefit. Another study, prospective randomized, 2000, again look at the number of patients, 114 versus 122, and look at the pregnancy rate, 18% versus 9%. And we need to look at this study in proper context. Such low numbers, and you cannot arrive at conclusions. Again, this was a non blinded RCT. So, what does the Cochrane database tell? Aspirin versus no treatment. Currently, the use of empirical low dose aspirin for the general IVF population cannot be recommended. And this is based on available evidence from the randomized controlled trial in which no single outcome measured demonstrated a benefit. Similar meta analysis, 13 RCTs published in 2017, no, no difference in any of the parameters. Second, what about adding estrogen in the luteal phase? Again, very little evidence, very short, small study, 57 patients who had 4 milligram of estradiol compared to 60 patients who did not receive estradiol. There was no significant thickness in endometrial thickness at egg retrieval or on live birth rates. What about the use of sildenafil citrate? Again, small studies, RCT, 80 patients who had a poor endometrium in a dose of 50 milligram. The endometrial thickness was higher. Implantation rates and chemical pregnancy rates were higher, but not clinically significant. Another study, single case report, which shows that endometrium has increased. Look at the quality of publication, single case reports of use of sildenafil. We then come to one of the most popularly used therapy, and that is granulocyte colony stimulating factor or GCSF. This is available as a recombinant form and is used in multiple other conditions also, like transient bone marrow failure or aplastic anemia. The whole issue of GCSF started with this one publication from Norbert Gleicher, who published that using GCSF improves the pregnancy outcome. But look at a publication from the same author. From this four patient case study, he moved to a pilot study, Human Reproduction 2013, where he had 21 patients with endometrium of less than 7, and he showed that there was a thickness, but it did not vary between conception and non conception cycle. So, the same author who actually did publish the first four case studies of its benefit, the moment he moved into a RCT, he himself has proven that there is no benefit comparing GCSF and a placebo. But the world has caught on to this idea and are already following it. So this is the other study looking at an RCT granulocyte perfusing ECSF. Again, it does not improve pregnancy and implantation. The argument that is given is that there are no side effects and hence it is a safe product, but it is not so because there could be potential complications with intrauterine or systemic use of GCSF, and all these complications have been reported when GCSF has been given for other indications. What about pentoxifylline? Again, very limited studies, 20 cases, showing maybe marginal benefit, but there are no case control studies. What about platelet rich plasma? A small study from 2015 when it was perfused, PRP was perfused intrauterine, and the endometrial thickness showed an improvement in thickness and a pregnancy was observed. But the ASHRAE task force on managing thin endometrium recommends that there is very weak evidence for aspirin and it should not be used. Very weak evidence for luteal estradiol and it should not be used. Insufficient evidence for the use of sildenafil. Insufficient evidence and hence against the use of GCSF and again against the use of pentoxifylline, GnRH agonist, PRP, or stem cell because there is no significant control studies and we need further evidence. We then move on to another aspect which is extremely common and that is endometrial scratching. And again, this started from this publication in 2013, which mentioned that local injury to the endometrium doubles the incidence of successful pregnancy. Now, you can imagine any procedure which could double the pregnancy rate would be a miracle. But still, as and when more and more studies came into work, we knew that it does not help. In spite of this, from this survey, nearly 83% of ART physicians surveyed recommended, and 92% recommended it in patients with RIF, in spite of very little evidence. Because look at this RCT, 7 RCTs which concluded that there is no benefit of endometrial scratching. So again, the the practice guidelines against the use of GCSF and against the use of all the other parameters. So we then move to something which is slightly different, and that is the concept of endometrial receptivity from the thickness. And this is defined as a temporary and a unique sequence of events that makes the endometrium receptive to the implantation of an embryo. And this extends for a very short time from 3 to 6 days in the secretory phase. And to diagnose this, you have a test called endometrial receptivity analysis, which looks at what is the window of receptivity. And normally, what we have been taught is that for a cleavage stage 8 cell embryo, it is after 3 days of progesterone, and after a blastocyst, it is after 5 days of progesterone. But this is not constant and it does keep on varying, or it could be thinner or wider as well. So, to do this, you subject the patient to the HRT and you take an endometrial biopsy on the proposed day of embryo transfer. And this test tells us whether the endometrium is receptive, then it means there is no problem. Or if it is non receptive, then you need to modify the day of embryo transfer. And you move into the era of a personalized embryo transfer. But instead of doing all embryo transfers of blastocysts at 5 days of progesterone, what you do is transfer the embryo on a personalized day, which could vary from between 3 days of progesterone to 7 days of progesterone based on the patient's receptivity assay. So, from an embryo transfer, you move to a personalized embryo transfer. And we have published our data on this 248 patients who had unexplained recurrent implantation failure, and we transferred the embryos based on the ERA outcome. And what we found that in patients who had a receptive endometrium, which means we did not do anything, and patients who had a non-receptive endometrium where we transferred a day 5 blastocyst after 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 days of progesterone, the pregnancy rates are similar, both using self oocytes or in donor oocyte. So, in nearly 20% of the patients, the window is displaced, and this is possibly the reason for the recurrent implantation failure. And you could have a new generation era where just by taking a drop of cervical mucus, you could find out whether the endometrium is receptive or not. So, based on the current evidence, a hysteroscopy is possibly the only test which can benefit a patient who has a refractory thin endometrium. Most of the other therapeutic or the treatment options, there is either unclear effect or there is no evidence of benefit. So this then brings us to the future as to what are we looking for? And there are two different concepts that one need to look at. One is of endometrial microbes and endometritis, and second is the issue of stem cell therapy. Now, Semmelweis was the Hungarian physician who studied and described puerperal fever, and he found that the mortality from puerperal fever was 3 times higher in a ward which was managed by physicians as opposed to a ward which was managed by nurses, completely contrary to what one would have expected. And the reason behind this was that physicians performed autopsies, and when these physicians then went back to the maternity ward to deliver, they carried these cadaverous particles with them, whereas nurses and midwives did not perform autopsies. So there was the first issue that there are germs which could lead to infection. Now, these microbes are in a humongous number in the human body. It contains tenfold more microbes than human cells and accounting for up to 3% of the total body mass. And we have completely ignored this till now. There is evidence that these microbes have an impact on the receptivity of the endometrium. And what has been found that in patients where the microbes are healthy, the pregnancy rates are better as opposed to those in whom the microbes are unhealthy. And what has been found is that we need an atmosphere which is lactobacillus, that which is prolific in lactobacillus. If it is deficient in lactobacillus, the pregnancy rates are lower. There is also evidence that there is a high incidence of chronic endometritis in patients who have repeated implantation failures. The second area is that of stem cell, because endometrium is one organ which undergoes regular shedding and regeneration with every menstrual cycle. And in patients where the endometrium is damaged, like those with Asherman syndrome or very atrophic endometrium, this regeneration of endometrium is affected. And this is a pilot study looking at whether autologous cell therapy will benefit or not. What this study shows that the specific microenvironment in which these adult stem cells regulate is called the endometrial niche. Now, this endometrial niche is located in the endothelium of the spiral arterioles of the basal layer. So, the endometrial stem cells develop from the endothelium of the spiral arterioles in the basal layer. Now, in patients who have a problem there, this layer is somehow disrupted. There is a defect in the niche, or the basal layer of the endometrium. This gets replaced by fibrotic tissues. And this could lead to either an Asherman syndrome or to complete endometrial atrophy. So, what this study proposed is that 4 to 5 days after menstruation, the patient underwent a hysteroscopy to confirm that there is a problem. One day later, they instilled GCSF. After 5 days, the patient underwent apheresis to isolate the bone marrow stem cells from the peripheral blood. These were isolated in the analyzer, and through a uterine catheterization, it was transported right into the spiral arterioles. The patient then had a repeat hysteroscopy, and if this proved benefit, the patient had a subsequent ART cycle. The whole process lasting for nearly 4 to 6 months. And what it showed was that pre treatment and post treatment, there was a significant improvement in the endometrial thickness from a pre treatment average of 4.5 to a post treatment average of nearly 7 millimeters. Not only this, there were 3 spontaneous pregnancies and 14 embryo transfers, resulting in another 7 pregnancies, 5 live births with a 38% live birth rate. But this is only a pilot study. This needs to be replicated and properly conducted at multiple centers. So, to summarize, I would say that still today, conventional ultrasound is the simplest and the most efficient method to evaluate the endometrium. Newer technologies like color Doppler and 3D do help, but they do not add to the predictive value. If the endometrium is inadequate, the best option that we have currently is to freeze the embryos and then transfer them when we have a better endometrium. No adjuvant has been shown to be superior to other. We should start looking at the endometrium from a receptive perspective rather than a good perspective. And ERA is just one of the first tools. It is not the answer to all problems. GCSF and stem cell therapy should still be considered as experimental procedures. There is no role of scratching, though stem cell appears to be the most promising of all the treatment options available. And physicians must balance the prognosis for patients if they proceed with treatment with a thin endometrium and consider alternative treatments. Because currently, there is minimal evidence to support any specific protocol or adjuvant that will significantly improve the pregnancy outcomes in such patients who have a persistently thin endometrium.